I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to a video conference edition of the New York Times Close-Up. It's been a politically brutal couple of months for Donald Trump, and it only got worse in the last week or so. He's been ripped for ignoring the coronavirus for weeks, now claiming the virus is fading away despite a sharp rise in cases. He told a rally he wanted a slowdown in testing. The economy is in recession. Experts say it may take years to fully recover. He seems to have totally missed the moment with the racial justice protests following the killing of George Floyd by police and staged a disastrous photo op at a Washington church. He suffered two stunning rebukes from the Supreme Court on gay rights and the DREAM Act. His former national security advisor, John Bolton, says the president is, quote, a danger for the republic. And Bolton's bombshell book says Trump asked China's president for election help. Even Trump's niece has written a damning book about her Uncle Donald. And the Tulsa rally aimed at jumpstarting his campaign was an overhyped dud. About 6,000 people in an arena that seats 19,000. As for the polls, a new Harvard-Harris national poll has Biden ahead 56% to 44%, the same 12-point lead as in last week's Fox poll. A Quinnipiac poll has his job approval at 42%, with 55% disapproving. It's still early, more than 4 months to go before the election, but just how much political trouble is Trump in? Plenty to talk about with a distinguished panel. Annie Karni, a White House correspondent for the New York Times, Michael Crowley, also a White House correspondent for the Times, and Trip Gabriel, a national correspondent for the Times. Trip, we're looking at those poll numbers. In my recollection, anything 10 points or behind is considered a landslide. Does this mean we just don't have to read anything about the campaign for the next 4 months, or 4 months really a long time and anything can happen?
Well, Sam, 4.5 months ago, I don't think anyone really knew much about the coronavirus pandemic, at least as it was affecting the United States. And we certainly were not experiencing mass protests around the country about police violence against Black Americans. So 4.5 months is an awfully long time. Trump was, Trump's lowest moment in the 2016 general election was after the Access Hollywood tape, and the polls immediately, that was October of 16, showed him about 10 to 12 points behind Hillary Clinton. Things tightened almost immediately after that to a small single-digit race in the national polls, and so could that happen again? It certainly could happen again. The table, though, that's been set in terms of who approves of Donald Trump and who approves of Joe Biden is vastly different than it was in the Clinton versus Trump election, and this does look like a much tougher hand for Trump, particularly as an incumbent president, to deal himself out of.
And what do the latest polls actually suggest? The Times poll in particular, and particularly not so much the national polls, but in those battleground states, which really tell the story.
Well, he is behind, as I think you mentioned, 14 points in the New York Times national poll, which was released this week, and the battleground poll of the 6 tightest states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Arizona, and Florida, he's behind 9 points collectively, and as many as 10, I think, in Pennsylvania, which is really a Priorities USA, the largest kind of pro-Biden super PAC, has decided that Pennsylvania is the tipping point state, meaning that's the state that will determine who goes over 270 electoral votes. And for Biden to have a 10-point lead now in Pennsylvania is quite significant. Trump is just underperforming with all the demographic groups compared with 2016. Particularly notable among among white women with college educations. He he's behind Biden by 39 points among that demographic group. Clinton only won them by 7 points. There's a similar kind of disparity among white voters without college education. So, the fundamentals of who likes Trump and who likes Biden in battleground states are just not propitious at all for Donald Trump.
Annie Karni, Anthony Fauci says that the next 2 weeks in terms of the coronavirus are going to be crucial. Obviously, as Tripp says, we are 4.5 months out from the election, but so far, how is the coronavirus playing in the election, in the campaign, and what is the likely impact going to be in that campaign?
Well, I think the biggest question, and that we just don't know, will be, do we have a normal election in November? Are people able to get to the polls? Trump is clearly casting a lot of doubt on fraud in the election, raging against mail-in ballots. This is going to be, I think, the big story of November. So that's how the coronavirus will affect the election overall. In terms of how it's affecting Trump's standing, it started by absolutely decimating him, especially among older voters who are critical to his success, when he started doing the task force news conferences every day. A lot of older voters especially have, the campaign has told me that they like Trump on the policies, they don't like his style and his personality. And when the style and the fighting with reporters and the lies are the dominant storyline, they start to move away from him. Another issue is that these kind of voters see Biden as a reasonable alternative in a way they would have never, ever considered Hillary Clinton. You can't underestimate that Hillary Clinton was seen 20 years of Republican attacks on her, made her appear to be as corrupt. Her corruption, apparent corruption, outweighed Donald Trump's apparent corruption in 2016 to a lot of Republican voters. That just isn't the case with Biden. And the Trump campaign so far has really failed to do a contrast to kind of try and paint him as corrupt. They had plans to make hay out of Hunter Biden. That storyline has gone away. They're being very reactive right now. They don't seem to have a strategy to paint him a certain way. They're trying to call him a socialist when it's very hard to paint Joe Biden as a socialist when he's a moderate Democrat who's actually having, if anything, issues exciting the left wing of his party. So to answer your question, the coronavirus has in some ways sent Trump into a tailspin with critical voting blocs, seniors in particular, women in particular, and made it much harder for him to gain any sort of advantage with Black voters that they've been talking a lot about increasing their standing with over how they did when they got 8 points in 2016.
Michael Crowley, we talk a lot about domestic issues, of course, race, the virus, but what about foreign policy? What about the annexations of the West Bank and Israel? What about China and trade? What about the accusations made by John Bolton in his book? What impact is that having on the campaign and likely to have on the election in November?
Well, because I'm most interested in foreign policy, I like to think that it's a defining issue. I think right now it's really not what voters are thinking about. And that's partly because there's just not much going on. And I mean that in two different ways. The first way is that the coronavirus has essentially, largely frozen international diplomacy. The diplomats are not traveling, heads of state are not meeting. Now, President Trump is just today hosting the Polish president, Duda, at the White House. So there's a little bit of an attempt to resume that. And people will recall that the president wanted to have the G7 summit in the Washington area this month. And essentially, nobody wanted to go along with that, particularly German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The other way I mean that is that President Trump had several kind of major initiatives that either have dead-ended or are petering out quietly on the diplomatic front. He has been pressuring Iran rather mercilessly with the goal of getting Iran to return to the table to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal that the president scrapped. Iran, he has failed to succeed in doing that, and Iran seems to be calculating they are just going to wait out the election and hope that Trump loses. He tried to do this, kind of incredibly ambitious nuclear deal with North Korea, which everyone, including John Bolton, said was hopeless, and it turned out they were all right. That's gone nowhere. There's no evidence that it's going to go anywhere. There's really not time to do any kind of a significant deal at this point. He has withdrawn troops from Afghanistan, but there has not been a major peace deal in Afghanistan with the Afghan government. So there is this looming question of whether he can still pull off a trade deal with China, which would be quite significant. And there is the looming question of whether Bibi Netanyahu will annex parts of the West Bank with Trump's permission. I would say, you mentioned that, that's probably those are the two biggest outstanding questions that could have a major effect on the campaign right now.
Trump, Gabriel, we saw that photo op at the church in Washington. We also saw what looked like a dud of a rally in Tulsa that was disappointing to the president, whether that was lousy advance work or lack of enthusiasm or fear about the coronavirus or a combination of all three. But what does it suggest about enthusiasm for the president or the status of the president's campaign?
Well, Annie might know more about the Trump campaign advance team, but I think that the lack of ability to fill the arena in Tulsa, is a colossal failure to know who's going to come out to your events, and that's kind of an inside baseball aspect of a political campaign. But
it's something you never do, right? I mean, you could fill a room.
I can't think of the last time, at least from 2016 and more recently in 2017, that he has failed to pretty nearly fill these arenas of similar size, 12 to 20,000 people. But you know what? They're in a bubble in a lot of ways. They don't understand how broadly Americans are fearful of the coronavirus. We see lots of images of states returning to some sort of normality, excuse me. But the majority of folks in America would prefer the federal government to slow down reopenings if it's a matter of protecting public health. I mean, people are just still fearful, particularly of mass gatherings. I mean, you saw the Charlotte, North Carolina, basically tell Trump that he's not welcome to hold his his convention there in late August, and they bailed out, and now they're going to do some kind of a version of it in Jacksonville, Florida, one of the few Republican-run major cities in this country. So, and who knows whether that will also look a lot like the Tulsa rally recently. So. They're in a bubble about a lot of things. There are some bright spots for Trump. I mean, in our New York Times recent polling, he still has a huge advantage on the economy. Even though unemployment is currently around 13%, most voters do not blame Donald Trump. I mean, he's preferred, to Joe Biden on the handling of the economy. If his campaign can turn this back around into a choice election on who you'd like to, handle the economy, that is going to be to Trump's advantage rather than just what's currently going on, a pretty straight referendum on his handling of the coronavirus and the protest situations.
Annie, the Times reported that the president was depressed over the attendance at the Tulsa rally. If I were the president, I think I'd be more than depressed. I'd be absolutely furious that my aides couldn't fill that arena with anybody, whatever they were doing, as long as they were breathing. What was the real reaction, and what were the repercussions in the White House and in the Trump campaign?
I mean, it was stunning, in part because let's think about where they held it. Tulsa, this is a red state that he won by more than 20 points. I don't have it in front of me. I mean, this shouldn't be a problem with enthusiasm for Trump in Tulsa, Oklahoma. What happened here, I think, was mostly they underestimated the fear of the coronavirus. But, the obvious question is, after a botched job like that, where they had an overflow space, where the president was supposed to address supporters that he literally had to cancel at the last minute because it was completely empty, is who's going to get fired, right? So far, we have not seen a campaign shakeup involving Brad Parscale, the campaign manager, losing his job. But this did exacerbate tensions between the White House and the campaign. White House officials told me they were hearing from donors and hearing from Republican lawmakers on the Hill expressing real concern about how this could have happened, not because one rally is so significant, but because if this data is off, what other data potentially is off? What other mistakes are, how can they fix it, and do they have time to fix it? That was kind of what I was hearing from the White House. Really, really angry, feeling like the president was not served well by his campaign team. And the president, you know, before he got on stage, he was absolutely livid, is what we heard from people on the ground there, demanding to talk to Brad. Brad made himself scarce, was not backstage to get lashed by the president. But then actually kind of more frightening to people was that on the way home, Donald Trump wasn't yelling and fuming as we, you know, stories have described him for years now. It was almost just muted and like quiet, which in a way was more concerning, that the real, more and more every day, the real prospect that this isn't going well for him seems to be sinking in with him. And that the fact that he could lose is becoming a reality, even though aides often try and shield him from bad news.
And Michael Crowley, if the president thinks he's going to lose, does that make him bolder in foreign policy, or does that make him more practical, or does that not affect things at all? Where is he likely to go in terms of foreign policy over the next 4 months?
I would think it makes him bolder. He wants to be seen as achieving things and moving forward. You know, Annie had a nice phrase. She said the campaign has been reactive to Joe Biden. I think Trump likes to create his own reality as much as possible. The coronavirus has forced him to be very reactive, has created this ultimate reality around him. So I could see Trump going for bold strokes. You know, something like just merely meeting with Kim Jong-un was this incredible wall-to-wall theatrical production that the couple times, 3 times he did it, you know, that consumed a couple days of media coverage and showed Trump on the world stage as a, you know, as an important leader making decisions about war and peace and life and death. So I think he has an incentive to do that sort of thing. And I think in particular, they have been drawing down in Afghanistan. That is somewhat of a success story. He's been able to do that without things getting markedly worse, although they're never good there. I could see him trying to spotlight that. And then again, the last thing I'll say, the X factor here, will he give Bibi Netanyahu the green light to do a partial annexation of the West Bank, which would be incredibly dramatic, command huge amounts of news attention, but comes with a lot of risks for the potential for a backlash, violence, and instability in the region. So that would be a real dice toss.
Annie, a quick last question, if I might. Why are the Republicans so concerned about mail voting, voting by mail in November?
I think that they're concerned. I mean, they're trying to create a sense that this election is going to be corrupt in some way. They're trying to say that, you know, dead people will vote, or people will vote multiple times. And this is because I think that they are worried that it will give Joe Biden an advantage if mail-in voting becomes a way for people to avoid going to the polls. One thing is to remember is that Donald Trump himself is a mail-in voter. So are most of his family members and senior staff. Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, a mail-in voter. So they overlook that little fact.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Trip Gabriel, Annie Karni, Michael Crowley of the New York Times. Coming up next, the pandemic, if it has you stuck at home. The Times has a new section with some ideas to keep you occupied. Coming up next. The coronavirus decimated the travel industry. Most people have canceled any plans for big trips. That's made it hard for the New York Times travel section to extol the wonders of Paris, Provence, or Patagonia. So the Times launched a section to address the needs of the millions of people stuck inside. It's called At Home. Check out these headlines. Opera over the phone offers passion in a pandemic. Digital field trips, museum adventures abound for kids. Has pandemic snacking lured us back to big food and bad habits? and the obligatory How to Shape Your Eyebrows at Home. And no better choice to oversee at home than New York Times travel editor Amy Virshup. Amy, at what point was the epiphany when we realized we had to put the print travel section on hiatus and start a print at home section?
We sort of were going along doing our print section, and then just at a certain point, I guess it was, I'm trying to even remember, everything is blurred together, right? We don't even know what day of the week it is, never mind which week. But I guess, you know, we have a standing column in travel called 36 Hours, which tells people, you know, how to spend a long weekend in a city. And a few weeks into the pandemic, we realized that we just couldn't tell people to do that anymore. So we held that, and then we did a special column for people who were, for people to crowdsource and tell us what they were doing at home. And people really, really responded to that. And I think maybe that was a moment where we felt like, okay, people are really, you know, we're here for the duration. We're living in our apartments or our houses, and we're not going anywhere, and that it's time to kind of put the travel section on pause.
For those who have missed at home, either online at nytimes.com or the news section in print, what kind of advice have we been giving people? What kind of help have we been providing that really comes in handy to people who are hibernating or stuck at home in one way or another?
So we really have been trying to hit, like, we try to think about, okay, what are the facets of people's lives that they need help with. So in the print section, I can tell you that every issue has some kind of social or emotional piece to it. We've done everything from how to organize a community, like a neighborhood community association, to how to be more resilient. You know, these are tough times to be optimistic in, but how to gain that resiliency. We've talked about how children, you know, are responding to the pandemic and how you can deal with their fears. We also try to do fitness. We've done yoga, we've done running, we've done biking. We do cooking. Every week we have 5 dishes in the print section. Every week we have 5 dishes that you can cook that week. Some of them are themed. We did a Juneteenth roundup of recipes. We'll do a July 4th roundup of recipes. We are doing drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, treats, ice cream. How to make ice cream in a mason jar was a big hit. We are doing some travel now that people are thinking of traveling, but it's all, you know, domestic travel, and also a large number of people are doing road trips as opposed to flying anywhere. And then we also have every week in the print section, we do an activity because people have a lot of time on their hands. So we have crosswords, and then we also have something that you can do where you actually physically use the newspaper. We made people fold, we showed people how to fold printers' hats from their newspaper. We've made paper mache coronaviruses with them. So all kinds of things. And then we also do like how to have fun, how to enjoy yourself, and safely. We've had how to have people over to your house, that kind of thing.
It seems like one of the biggest challenges is what to do with the kids. So
Yes.
What are some of the more imaginative recommendations we've made?
We told you how to do a backyard camp out. Just set up a tent in your backyard and pretend that you're out in the woods. We talked about how to create your own summer camp at home for your children, with not really a very, very rigid, like now we go to arts and crafts, now we go to archery, but just sort of how to kind of recreate that experience a bit for your kids. We've done how to have, you know, backyard water fun. You can have you know, water balloon fights, or actually one of the things we suggested doing is taking like those big chore sponges and you cut them into strips, and then you like make a little starburst out of them and like either tie them together in the center or use a rubber band, and your kids can dip them in a bucket and throw them at each other for hours.
Yeah, only if you have a backyard though.
Only if you, well, they could do it in the park.
Or a big bathroom.
They could do it in the park. They could do it, on the sidewalk, as long as they don't hit anybody else. It's just water, and the sponges aren't going to litter. So that's good.
Have you gotten any better at giving your husband a haircut?
No, my son has taken over the duties.
Any idea what's going to change permanently, either at home or in travel, as a result of the virus?
Oh, for travel, it's going to be a long road back. And I think, obviously international travel is going to take a really long time to come back. Partly because, as the news was yesterday, say European countries aren't going to let Americans in. People are very fearful. I think it'll be interesting to see if masks become a permanent part of our attire in airports and on airplanes, although there's been a lot of controversy about masks and whether they're actually the airlines are actually enforcing the rules. Mm-hmm. At home, I think a lot of, it's not good for the economy and retail probably, but I think a lot of people are going to be looking at like, do I really need to buy that thing? Right. I looked in my closet today and I have a lot of shoes and I was like, I don't really need to buy any more shoes right now.
Right. We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
But if you're looking to find something to do at home, you can see the at-home section. And thanks to Amy Virshup for joining us. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.